In 1981, a low-budget Canadian slasher film didn't just fake danger on screen. It trapped its cast hundreds of feet underground in a real coal mine filled with explosive gas, censorship panic, and practical effects so disturbing they reportedly made the director physically ill. Today, we're uncovering 20 bizarre, disturbing, and weird facts about My Bloody Valentine. Fact number 1, they filmed inside a real death trap. When you watch My Bloody Valentine, the suffocating darkness, dripping walls, and endless tunnels don't feel like a movie set, and that's because they weren't. The production was filmed inside the real Princess Colliery coal mine in Sydney Mines, Nova Scotia, a fully authentic industrial mine that stretched hundreds of feet underground. This gave the film an atmosphere that couldn't be recreated on a soundstage, but it also exposed the cast and crew to genuine danger. Coal mines are naturally cramped, unstable, and poorly ventilated, and moving heavy camera equipment through narrow shafts meant constant logistical headaches. Lighting had to be carefully planned because too much heat or electrical activity could become hazardous in an enclosed environment. Every single scene had to be choreographed around real physical limitations instead of cinematic convenience. There were no wide-open spaces, no easy exits, and no room for error. What you're seeing on screen, the character sweating, struggling to move, brushing against low ceilings, wasn't acting. It was the reality of working deep underground in a space never meant for filmmaking. Fact number 2, one spark could have exploded the set. Filming underground came with an invisible threat most movie productions never face: methane gas. Coal mines naturally release methane, which is highly flammable and potentially explosive when it builds up in enclosed spaces. Because of this, the production couldn't use just any lighting equipment or electrical gear. Every piece of equipment had to meet strict safety standards to avoid sparking a disaster. This dramatically slowed down filming. Lighting setups took longer, power usage had to be constantly monitored, and crew members had to remain aware of air conditions throughout the day. Even routine tasks like repositioning a camera or adjusting a light became technical safety procedures instead of creative decisions. The result was a production that constantly felt like it was operating on borrowed time. Every setup carried tension, not just for the actors performing their scenes, but for the crew managing the environment around them. That underlying danger added real stress to the shoot, and ironically, helped fuel the film's anxious, claustrophobic energy. Fact number 3, locals accidentally ruined the movie set. In one of the strangest production mishaps, the mine was accidentally made too clean. When local workers discovered that a movie was being filmed at the Princess Colliery site, many of them took pride in the location and helped clean sections of the mine to make it look more presentable. There was just one problem. Director George Mihalka wanted the mine to feel grimy, dangerous, and authentically oppressive, not freshly scrubbed. The polished look completely destroyed the gritty atmosphere he was trying to create. So the production had to reverse the cleanup. Crew members intentionally dirtied walls, floors, and equipment again, repainting surfaces to restore the worn, stained appearance that made the tunnels feel threatening on camera. Time and money had to be spent undoing what was meant as a helpful gesture, just to reclaim the raw look that made the film visually convincing. Fact number 4, getting to set. Took hours every day. Getting to work wasn't as simple as stepping onto a soundstage. The mine's elevator system could only transport a limited number of people at a time, meaning cast and crew had to descend in waves rather than all at once. Traveling deep underground took significant time, and moving equipment made the process even slower. A simple call time could turn into a logistical puzzle, with different departments waiting their turn just to reach the filming location. If anything needed to be reshot or adjusted, it wasn't a quick fix. It meant coordinating another long underground trip. This created constant delays and forced the production to plan scenes carefully to maximize each trip underground. Once the crew was in position, they had to make every minute count. There were no easy coffee breaks, no quick resets, and no casual walk-offs between takes. The physical exhaustion added up fast, making the shoot far more demanding than a typical film set and pushing everyone involved to their limits. Fact number 5, censors cut almost 10 minutes of carnage. My Bloody Valentine originally contained significantly more graphic violence than audiences ever saw in theaters. The Motion Picture Association demanded extensive cuts to avoid an X rating. forcing the filmmakers to remove roughly 9 minutes of gore and violent footage from the final release. Entire kill sequences were shortened or eliminated, reducing the intensity of many deaths and muting the film's original shock value. For years, fans only knew these scenes existed through rumors, interviews, and fragmentary home video restorations. Some footage was eventually recovered in later releases, but much of the original material remains lost or incomplete. As a result, the version most audiences experienced wasn't the film the creators originally intended. It was a toned-down survival version shaped by cultural panic rather than artistic vision. And that censorship would become one of the movie's most infamous legacies. Fact number 6, the cast didn't know who the killer was. In most horror films, the actors know exactly who the villain is, even if the audience doesn't, but My Bloody Valentine took a different approach. Director George Mihalka deliberately kept the killer's identity hidden from much of the cast during production. The goal was simple: preserve genuine confusion and tension in the performances. If the actors didn't fully understand who was behind the mask, their reactions would feel more authentic on camera. Suspicion between characters wouldn't just be scripted, it would be psychologically real on set as well. This secrecy also prevented leaks and accidental spoilers during filming, which was especially important in a small production where word could travel quickly. Scenes were staged carefully to avoid revealing too much information to the cast until the final stretch of shooting. The result is a subtle layer of realism that most viewers never consciously notice. When characters hesitate, accuse each other, or seem uncertain about who they can trust, that uncertainty wasn't entirely acting. It was baked directly into the production process. Fact number 7, one actor solved the murder too early. Despite the director's secrecy, one actor unintentionally cracked the case early. Neil Affleck, who played TJ, began to suspect something unusual when he was unexpectedly sent to wardrobe and makeup for prosthetic fittings. The crew was preparing a special effect involving a severed arm for the film's climax, and Affleck quickly realized that if his character needed a fake arm created, there could only be one explanation. The prosthetic itself became the giveaway clue that exposed the killer's identity to him ahead of schedule. It wasn't something anyone meant to reveal. The logistics of special effects simply made secrecy impossible in that moment. Once Affleck understood what the makeup team was preparing, the mystery unraveled instantly. Ironically, the same behind-the-scenes craftsmanship that made the film's practical effects so convincing also spoiled one of the movie's biggest twists for at least one member of the cast. Fact number 8, the killer wasn't who you think. Although the story centers on familiar faces, the masked killer known as the Miner wasn't portrayed by any of the main cast during most of the film. Instead, the role was performed by actor Peter Cooper, who physically embodied the character whenever the mask was on screen. Cowper focused heavily on the Miner's posture, movement, and breathing patterns to make the character feel menacing and inhuman. The slow, deliberate walk, the rigid body language, and the heavy mechanical presence weren't accidents. They were carefully crafted physical choices meant to make the killer feel more like a force than a person. This separation allowed the main actors to remain emotionally detached from the physical performance of the killer, reinforcing the illusion that the Miner was an entirely separate entity stalking them through the tunnels. It's a technique often used in creature films and stunt-heavy roles, but it quietly adds to the film's unsettling tone without most viewers realizing there was a second performer shaping the character behind the mask. Fact number 9. The gore effects were so intense they shocked the director. The film's gruesome kills were brought to life by makeup effects artist Thomas R. Berman, whose practical effects pushed the limits of early 1980s horror realism. Severed limbs, crushed faces, and brutal wounds were designed to look disturbingly anatomical rather than theatrical. According to anecdotal reports from fan interviews and production lore, at least one of these effects was so graphic that director George Mihalka reportedly had a visceral reaction when he first saw it. While the exact details vary depending on the source, the story persists that the realism of the makeup crossed from impressive into genuinely uncomfortable territory, even for the people making the movie. Whether taken literally or as exaggerated legend, it speaks to how committed the effects team was to creating something that felt raw and unsettling instead of stylized. At a time when slasher films were competing for shock value, Berman's work aimed for authenticity rather than spectacle. Fact number 10, A real murder changed the movie forever. The massive censorship My Bloody Valentine faced didn't happen in a vacuum. In December of 1980, just months before the film's release, the assassination of John Lennon shocked the world and triggered renewed public outrage over violent media. Suddenly, movies, television, and music were being blamed for contributing to cultural violence, and regulatory groups became far more aggressive in policing graphic content. According to director George Mahalka, this shift in public sensitivity directly impacted how the MPAA evaluated the film's gore. What might have passed months earlier was now considered unacceptable. Studios grew nervous about backlash, lawsuits, and negative publicity. As a result, the pressure to reduce violent imagery intensified dramatically. My Bloody Valentine became one of the casualties of this cultural moment, forced to sacrifice large portions of its most graphic material simply to secure a theatrical release. Fact number 11. The studio was terrified of backlash. By the time My Bloody Valentine was preparing for release, the horror genre was already under intense scrutiny. Paramount Pictures had just weathered heavy criticism over the violence in Friday the 13th, which sparked public debate about whether slasher films were becoming too graphic and irresponsible. That controversy made studios extremely cautious. Executives didn't want another media firestorm, especially with a film built almost entirely around graphic murders. Combined with the heightened sensitivity following John Lennon's assassination, the industry suddenly became far more risk-averse. Paramount pushed aggressively to avoid an X rating, fearing that theaters would refuse to book the film, advertisers would pull support, and the studio's reputation could take a hit. This pressure directly influenced how much violence the film was allowed to retain, even if it meant sacrificing creative intent. Instead of leaning into the shock factor that made slashers profitable, the studio chose damage control. The result was a film that arrived in theaters already compromised by fear rather than driven purely by storytelling ambition. Fact number 12, the movie made money and still failed. On paper, My Bloody Valentine didn't completely bomb. The film was produced on a modest budget of around $2.3 million and earned approximately $5.7 million at the domestic box office. Technically, that's a profit, but Hollywood doesn't measure success only by raw numbers. It measures expectations. Slasher films in the early 1980s were exploding commercially, with some low-budget horror movies delivering massive returns. Studios hoped My Bloody Valentine would follow the same trajectory and become a breakout hit. Instead, the box office performance was underwhelming compared to competitors. Marketing costs, distribution expenses, and theater splits further reduced the actual profit margin. For Paramount, the film simply didn't justify the risk or the controversy it generated. As a result, the studio chose not to pursue the sequel that the ending clearly set up. What could have become a franchise instead stalled, leaving the film to slowly evolve into a cult favorite rather than an immediate commercial success. Fact number 13, critics literally walked out. When My Bloody Valentine premiered, not everyone stayed until the credits rolled. Several contemporary critics reacted harshly to the film's violence and tone, dismissing it as tasteless exploitation rather than entertainment. One of the most infamous reactions came from Canadian critic John Dodd, who reportedly walked out halfway through the screening and publicly condemned the movie in scathing terms. He described it as a film made for what he considered the worst instincts of its audience, attacking its brutality and lack of restraint. Other publications echoed similar sentiments, criticizing the movie for graphic imagery, shock-driven storytelling, and what they viewed as unnecessary sensationalism. Some critics even questioned whether public funding bodies should have supported a project of this nature at all. Ironically, this backlash only strengthened the film's reputation among horror fans over time. What critics rejected as offensive excess became exactly what cult audiences embraced, helping the movie survive long after its initial theatrical run faded. Fact number 14, the entire film was rushed into existence. My Bloody Valentine wasn't the result of years of careful planning. Pre-production moved at a blistering pace as the filmmakers raced to meet a targeted Valentine's Day release window. Locations had to be secured, crews assembled, and scripts finalized in a compressed time frame. Principal photography ultimately ran from late September through early November of 1980. leaving very little room for delays, reshoots, or major creative revisions. Every setback underground, equipment issues, access limitations, safety concerns directly threatened the schedule. This constant time pressure forced the production team to make fast decisions instead of perfect ones. Scenes were staged efficiently rather than elaborately. Solutions were chosen for practicality instead of polish. The goal was survival and completion rather than refinement. Fact number 15. The creepy end song was secretly brilliant. While most slashers relied purely on suspense scores and stingers, My Bloody Valentine added something unexpected, a haunting folk-style end credits song that lingers long after the final scene. Composer Paul Zaza wrote the melody specifically for the film, creating a tune that feels oddly nostalgic, almost innocent, despite the violence audiences had just witnessed. The song was performed by Scottish-Canadian tenor John McDermott, giving the ending a strangely emotional aftertaste rather than a traditional horror fade-out. This contrast made the ending feel unsettling in a different way. Instead of letting audiences release tension, the gentle melody created cognitive dissonance, beauty layered over brutality. It subtly reinforced the film's eerie mood even as viewers exited the theater. Fact number 16. One actress became a Canadian TV superstar. While My Bloody Valentine didn't launch massive Hollywood careers, it did quietly serve as an early stepping stone for actress Cynthia Dale, who played Patty in the film. Several years after the movie's release, Dale became a major television star in Canada when she landed a lead role on the legal drama Street Legal, which ran from 1987 to 1994 and became one of the country's most successful scripted series. Millions of viewers watched her weekly, making her a familiar face far beyond the horror community. For fans who discover My Bloody Valentine later, it can be surprising to recognize a future TV star hidden inside a gritty underground slasher. It's one of those fun retro connections that reminds viewers how cult films often preserve early snapshots of actors before their careers take off in unexpected directions. Fact number 17, it shares DNA with a horror classic. Actor Neil Affleck, who played TJ, also appeared in another iconic Canadian genre film in 1981, David Cronenberg's Scanners. While his role wasn't large, it connects My Bloody Valentine to one of the most influential body horror films ever made. Scanners became famous for pushing boundaries in practical effects and disturbing imagery, which makes the crossover especially interesting. Affleck found himself involved in two very different types of horror storytelling during the same year, one rooted in slasher tradition, the other grounded in cerebral science fiction terror. Fact number 18, it opened on Friday the 13th by accident. In a strange bit of horror irony, My Bloody Valentine premiered in Canada on February 13th, 1981, which happened to fall on a Friday the 13th. Considering the slasher boom happening at the time, the coincidence feels almost scripted. A violent horror film opening on the most famous unlucky date in horror history feels like perfect marketing, even though it wasn't intentionally planned that way. Fact number 19, the real mine no longer resembles the film. The Princess Colliery mine used for filming has not remained frozen in time as a dark industrial relic. Over the years, portions of the site have been repurposed, preserved, and incorporated into local heritage and tourism efforts. What was once a dangerous working coal mine, and later a slasher film location, now serves as part of the community's historical memory rather than an active industrial site. For fans, it's fascinating to realize that the tunnels that once hosted masked murders on film now represent regional history and education instead of fear. Fact number 20, controversy turned it into a cult legend. At the time of its release, My Bloody Valentine was criticized for being too graphic, too aggressive, and too exploitative for mainstream audiences. The censorship, backlash, and muted box office response kept it from becoming an immediate franchise success. But over time, those same controversial qualities became part of its appeal. Horror fans sought out the uncut versions, debated the missing footage, and celebrated the film's raw atmosphere and practical effects. What was once seen as excessive gradually became nostalgic and admired. Instead of fading into obscurity, the movie found a second life through home video, late-night screenings, and word of mouth among genre fans. The very elements that once held it back ultimately helped it earn its cult reputation, proving that sometimes controversy ages better than safe commercial success. If you enjoyed diving into the strange, dangerous history of My Bloody Valentine, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep-cut horror trivia every week here on Iconic TV Rewind. And let me know in the comments, which slasher classic should we uncover next? Your suggestions help shape future episodes.